data for the batch reports then. So just to be sure that we have all the data we need. So now we can go back to the PM server and start with the PM analyze part here. So before we start configuring any other things here, we will go to the project settings of the PM server. We have already talked about the language setting for alarms, for example, and about the startup list here. But what I want to show you here in the project settings are the archive settings. As we are now working with the PM Analyze, and PM Analyze needs the archives of the PM server, we have to talk about the archive settings, so what settings are available here for these archives. And as you can see here at the bottom, so maybe let's start here, there are some databases attached to the PM server project. These databases you can also find in the project path of the PM server, and all of these databases here are the databases where the archives are stored in. So that means if you go to the project path and then you're wondering what all of these databases are, so these databases are for the archives, and there are different archive types available. So we have the cyclic archive, segmented, or the sequential archive. By default, always the cyclic archive is selected, and you can find some more information or some detailed explanation of these settings inside of the help of the PM server. But the difference between them is in the cyclic archive, we have in this configuration here, we have that or these 5 databases for the archives, or these 5 archives here available. And if we have going to the next archive database here, because we have defined here and specific archive size, so which data we want to save within one archive before we create the next one. And if we create the next archive here automatically, as we are out of this range, then the last or the oldest archive will be deleted, so that we have only, in this case, 3 older archives available in the project. So this is the cyclic archive, so the oldest one will be deleted, and in the sequential archive, we will not delete the oldest archive, we will just detach the oldest archive and store this detached archive then in an archive folder, which we can select here where we want to store this archive. So that means in the cyclic archive, the oldest archive will be deleted, which is out of the range we have configured here, and in the sequential archive, we just detach this data, or we just detach this archive, store it somewhere else. So if we will need this data again, then we can attach it again so that we get more access. Then we have to configure the archive size. So that means we have a reference date. So when we want to start with the data, so in this case, it's the 1st of February this year, because the project was built up in February, because it's current month. And then we have the size of period. So that means how much data, or the data from which time range we want to store inside of this archive database. So by default, it's always 1 month. That means every month we have a new archive database, and we store the data for the current month in the current archive database. And then for the next month, we receive another, or we will create another database for that. And the last setting here, count of previous periods in the project directory. By default, this is 3. That means we have the current archive. So if we go to the list of the archives which are available in our project, we have the current archive, so the archive for the month February. And then we have the 3 previous periods. So you see we have the archive for January, for December last year, and November last year. And we also have already the database or the archive for the next month. So of course we can change this setting here so that we get access to older values, older archives, for example, or we can also change the size of periods. So for example, we get one archive for one whole year or for 1 quarter, for example. This setting is important if you want to work with historical data. So for example, you have a legacy system and you want to import the historical data from this legacy system to the PM server project. And the data you have from this legacy system is, for example, from 2020. And then you see at the moment, the oldest archive we have available in this project is from November last year, so 2022. That means we cannot import historical data of 2020 because our archives are not going to that time range. So it means we need to change the size of period or even the count of previous periods so that we have an archive available for the time frame or for the time range we want to insert the historical data. So just for information, when I started working with the PM server and the PM analyze part, and I wanted to import historical data, then I was wondering why I do not receive the data and why I do not get access to it. And then I have to find out what the problem was, and it was exactly this scenario. So that means I have reported data where I do not have any archive for, so that means I do not get access to this data because there is no archive, so no database. I cannot store the data anywhere. And to prevent you to do the same mistakes I have done when starting working with that, just for information, if you want to import historical data, for example, then be sure that your archive settings fit the time range for historical data too. Right. There is a question in the chat. What is the longest period recommended for storing historical data? Good question. There's no easy answer for that, as it of course belongs to the amount of data you want to store. So for example, if you just have, I don't know, one tag, and you have one value each hour for this one tag, and you want to import this data for the last 2 years, then this is another amount of data than, for example, that you have 100 tags where you want to, or where you have one value for each of these 100 tags in 1 second recorded, for example. So that means there's no hard limitation where we can say, okay, you can just have that amount of data, or you can have just that size of archive there. So this depends on the amount of data you have and, of course, on the resources of your PC. But for that use, we just recommend to select the archive type to a sequential archive, and then, for example, you can change the size of period or the count of previous periods. Then you can import the data because all of the databases then are available, so for your time range. And then if you do not need them currently, then you can just detach this information, or you can just detach this database, store it in the archive folder, so that you can attach it every time you need this information again. So this is what I would recommend, so that you do not have this data then available all the time, so the system always have to deal with this big amount of data maybe, but you have it inside of the PM server, so if you need the data, you get access to it. So this is what I would recommend if you want to go back for a really long time. That, for example, if you just have data from last year or from the last 2 years, then this should be no problem inside of the PM server. You have to play a little bit with that, depending on amount of data then. But normally 1 year ago or maybe 2 years ago, depending on the data, should be no problem here. Right, so that's it for the archive settings. So as I just said, this can be a quite important setting if you want to work with historical data. So as I just said at the beginning, I always make the same mistake here. So important for you to remember if you want to work with historical data, check your archive setting. Right, so before we go on, we first have to import the new tags from my Windows system. I haven't imported them, so that we are able to work with them, we have to import them again. So just let me import them, and let me import the alarm blocks too, so that we get the information from the new alarms too. Right, then let's have a look at my alarm archive, if there are all the things available. So this is okay. Let me check again with the alarm blocks. They are the same. Okay, so I can stay with the same alarm archive. I do not have to add any more alarm blocks here, as I have imported them and they are quite the same here, which are used in the other alarms I have created. And before we now can start with the next things, we have to add an tag archive, so that we can then save the tag values inside of an archive here. And for that, we will add a new tag archive. So again, just select the entry in the list here, in the tree list. Then we can add a new tag archive, give it a name. So I think new tag archive is, maybe we just take a tag archive and delete the new, right? So tag archive, for example. Then similar to what we have seen in the alarm archive, we have to select the stations where we want to get data from. By default, all the stations which are connected to the project are enabled here or are active. But you can also say, if you have multiple WinSystem systems connected, for example, then you can decide that you do not want to have all of them, for example, so then you can just deactivate them. But for us, everything here is okay. So we go next. The maximum archive interval. So the tag archive inside of the PIM server is not working in the way the tag logging of the WinSystem is working. So for example, in the WinSystem tag logging, when you have the archive values there, you have, or you store the data every, or cyclic, so you store the data cyclic. So for example, in every 1 second, you store the data inside of the WinSystem in the archive tags. The PIM server tag archive is working different. So the tag archive of the PIM server is only saving the data if the data or if the value has changed. So you do not just get the data cyclic, you just get the data if the tag value has changed, or this is the maximum archive interval, if the tag value hasn't changed for, in this case, 5 minutes, then the PIM server collects the tag value again and saves it or stores it in the tag archive. So that means every time the tag value changes, then we store this tag value inside of the tag archive, and if the tag value will not change in these 5 minutes here, then we also collect this tag value and save it in the tag archive. So you can also change this maximum archive interval, so you see which time range is available, so 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10, 15, 30, or 60 minutes. For us, 5 minutes is okay. Depending on your project, maybe it can be that you have to change this maximum archive interval, but normally the 5 minutes are okay here. So we go to next. You see again a summary of the settings you have done here. And if you now click on finish, then we have a new tag archive here. If you go to the tab general, you can change the archive name again. You can also change the maximum archive interval, so no problem here. And you can decide, so with this checkbox, you can decide if tags in this tag archive should get a prefix with the station name, so that you know where this tag is coming from. You or the customer can decide if they want to have something like that or not, so then you can just enable this setting or not. And then again, you see all the stations which are available, and then you can decide which from which station here you want to receive data from, or for which station you want to add text to the tag archive here. Right, so if we now go to the tab text, we have a list at the right here with all these stations, and then of course with all the text within these stations. So what we have imported, for example, from the WinCC inside of the local station here. And maybe we can first start with that one here. So for example, if you want to add a tag to the tag archive so that we can save the tag values of this tag inside of the PIM server tag archive, then we just have to select the tags we want to store. So for example, we want to take the new temperature curves and then just drag and drop them to the middle here. And then you see now they are added to the tag archive. And if we now save the changes and then we change the tag value of one of these tags, then this tag value for the tag will be saved inside of this tag archive. So we will save the changes here for the moment. So that means at the moment we just save the tag values of temperature 1 and temperature 2. Of course, we could add some text of the PM group, for example, so what we have used for PM control or PM quality. So up to you what you want to store here in this thing here. As I just said, for the temperature 1 and temperature 2, I have created a simulation using scripts. So that means we receive some more data, so I will just insert them here in the tag archive. Right, so now we can start with the next thing here. So in the first step, we want to create a new state model. So remember what we have created here in the state models is just the basis used for the PM quality, so for the project, for the process here. And now we want to add another state model for some machine state. So if we imagine that we want to get the states of the machine which are producing this product, we want to produce with control and the PM quality. We want to get some information about the machine which is doing these things. So we will add a new state model. We already know how to do this, so we select the state model in the list and we give it a new name. So for example, these are the machine states. And then we want to add some more rules here. So like that, for example. And then we have to insert the state names. So for example, we have stop as a state, then we have running, error, we have no material, for example. No, not material, like that. Then maybe no pickup, because at the end of the machine nobody takes out the finished products, whatever. And delayed, so the machine is just running slowly here. And then we have to add the rules. So for example, stop is in is the tag value 0, running is 1, then 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I just have to take the same states of what I have configured of my script. But of course, if you're working on the real project, you're not working with the script which simulates some machine states here. So you can define the state model here in the way you have it configured in your PLC, for example. So depending on where this information is coming from. I will first save the changes here. And now we will go to hierarchy. I have already mentioned the hierarchy part when we have created the first state model for the PM quality. And for this machine, for this state model here, we want to create a hierarchy so that we can use this information to calculate the availability later. So for that, for example, we can add a new parent group, for example. This is for, what's this group? No. Is scheduled for production. production. Oops. Legs missed. Scheduled for production. So in this parent group, we want to store all the states when the machine should be running. So unknown is not inside of it, so we put it out. And here we have a group.
Mình tạo folder để lúc đấy mình kéo qua đó được.
Ví dụ is running in
mình phân
in
chia
a
lại.
state, so that means the machine is producing something, and then we want to add another group for unproductive.
Đấy, rồi sau đó kéo cái
So
ngoài
when the
vào
machine
để
is
mình
stopped,
phân
for
loại.
example. And now we can add the different states to the groups here, for example. So the arrow mode is of course unproductive. So it is scheduled for production, so the machine should be running, but it is in an error state, so that means it should be running, but it isn't. Running is of course a productive state. No material is a productive state because it's just waiting for the material there in the late step 1, 2. And then we have another parent group. No, not like that. Go outside. Delete that one. So we add a new parent group, planned downtime. Because we have because we have a stop state created, so that means the machine is now scheduled for production, so that means the machine should not be running because it is stopped, and this is this state here. So unknown we can just leave outside of the groups because we do not need them, and now we have a hierarchy for all our states created. So we have all the states which are scheduled for production, and there we have one group for all the productive states and one group for all the unproductive states, and we have a group for all the planned downtime states, so in this case just stop. But of course you can define the hierarchy in another way if you want to. I have just selected this kind of hierarchy because we need this kind of because we can group these states in the way we can use them for the availability calculation later. So now we have the definition of the state model. We remember we have here some states, we have the rules. So if the tag we want to add then to the instance of this machine state has this specific tag value, then we get this specific state. And we can also change the color of them. So we want to display this information later as a Gantt diagram in the PM_Analyze. And we want a better overview of all of these states here. So you see there are a lot of colors, and we want to see in which state we are. So for example, an error is at the moment green, and an error state is definitely not green. So we want to have a red color here, for example. So that means we can just go to color, click on the button, and then we can change the color, this state, for displaying it later inside of the PM_Analyze. So stop is okay. So let's take something like black, for example. Maybe no material is yellow, blue is okay, brown is okay. So maybe we can do it like that, so that we get a better overview of all of these states later for the PM_Analyze. So just to show you, we can also change the color here. And now we will create an instance for this state model, so new instance. We have now automatically the name machine state underscore 1, because this is the naming by default for the instances, and now we have to add the source tag, so which tag we want to use for this state model definition here for this instance, and here we want to take the PM_Analyze state tag I have created for this purpose here. So we just, again, like we have seen for the PM quality state model, we can just drag and drop them from the list to the specific field, so in this case to the source field, and now we can save the changes, and now we have the state model definition for this one tag for the machine state here. So, and now we can go back to